Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a fantastic event tonight here at the Centre for Independent Studies. We've got a couple of very special guests joining us. I'm sure everyone, of course, is aware, but we're going to be launching this terrific book by none other than Joe Hockey himself. Thank you for joining us, Joe. But first, what I'd like to do is invite our two special guests this evening to give us a very brief overview of their thoughts. Obviously, James Morrow here. He's the national political editor at the Daily Telegraph. He was, for quite some time, the opinion editor. He's host of the Sky News TV show Outsiders, which is a fantastically interesting little program for those of you who haven't seen it before. And obviously, of course, James is an expert not only on Australian politics but also on American politics, having been one of the significant Australian figures covering Donald Trump, his rise and fall and perhaps rise again. And of course, Joe, I would suggest for an audience like this that Joe Hockey doesn't need much of an introduction, but I would like to hit a couple of high points.
Give it a full introduction.
Exactly. Well, so obviously Australia's ambassador to the United States during one of the most turbulent periods, I think, in recent years, which is fantastic. Joe, obviously, prior to that was Treasurer. And long-time CIS friends will know that Joe gave one of his very first speeches as Treasurer at a Centre for Independent Studies event back in 2014, which was fantastic. We had a couple of hundred people for lunch back before we knew what coronavirus was. But what I'd like to do now is invite James to give his thoughts on the book, and then we can get down to questions.
Well, all right. Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Simon. It is great fun to be here this evening, and a great pleasure tonight, and a great privilege to be asked to speak to launch the diplomatic memoirs of our friend and guest of honor tonight, Mr. Joe Hockey. Now, of course, as Simon said, Joe is a man who needs no introduction, and Simon has already admirably done
provided
this.
No
but
introduction.
Guess what?
Right.
I'm going to do it anyway. Again, just to reprise, Joe Hockey, as we all know, is a veteran of Australian public life, having entered the Parliament in 1996 after a career in law. While representing North Sydney and Canberra, he held a number of roles, perhaps most famously as Treasurer, and I am sure that he always knew what the cash rate was. This was, of course, before he became ambassador to the United States, which is why we are here tonight to launch these wonderful memoirs. And I was reflecting on this, and I was wondering, why is it that of all the people here, I was asked to come and help launch this superlative memoir of life as a diplomat in Washington during one of its most fascinating periods, I think we would all say, since the end of the Second World War. So I started to reflect on what are some similarities between Joe Hockey and myself. And, Joe Hockey is, of course, the son of a migrant father, an Armenian from Palestine. I am, as Anthony Albanese once said of Christina Keneally, a great migrant success story. Joe and I have both been pulled up for enjoying the occasional cigar in an impolitic place, whether it's in the Treasurer's courtyard or perhaps in the dining room when the door is open. Sorry, honey. But it's been raining a lot lately. But we've got a few things in common, which makes this all a little bit easier. So for now, I just want to say a few words about this memoir, which is, and I say this as someone who reads a lot of biography and autobiography, one of the most fun and entertaining reads in the genre I have enjoyed for a long time. Certainly there have been other prominent Australians who have entered diplomatic service or politics and finished up with a contract to tell their tale, and all too often those sorts of works can be, frankly, turgid, self-justifying, or dull. Joe's memoirs, which we're launching here, none of the above, and it is happily free from grumpy ruminations about the slave galley configuration of international business class. Instead, it is a book that is suffused with a combination of, I would say, cosmopolitan joy at the wonder of the opportunity to be Australia's ambassador to Washington and all that comes with it, and also a deep devotion to representing the interests of his own country to the very best of his ability. And I was reminded of this, I was reading it, and I thought about a great story about Ronald Reagan. And as an aside, I remember, I'm old enough to remember dating myself here, when, as a boy growing up in New York City in the 1980s, it was Ronald Reagan who was considered every bit the irresponsible mad cowboy who was going to get us into a nuclear punch-up with Russia. Well, those were the days, right? Anyway, the story used to be told about Ronald Reagan that when he would meet an American ambassador who had returned home from his or her overseas posting for the first time, the ambassador would be ushered into the Oval Office. There would be Reagan, smiling and affable amidst all the Remington bronzes of cowboy scenes that he loved from all over the West, and with a map of the world on his easel. And Reagan would ask the ambassador, say, well, which is your country? And the ambassador would invariably point to, France or the Philippines or Guinea-Bissau or wherever. And Reagan would smack his hand on the desk, point to the USA and say, no, this is your country. Well, there is no doubt that despite Joe's very global and sophisticated worldview, he went to Washington with one aim, to advance Australia's interests, often clashing with two formidable opponents, the Trump administration and the DFAT bureaucracy. Now, it turns out if you are one of those who have read the book already, you will know getting the okay from Canberra bureaucrats to do something as simple as rehabilitate an embassy tennis court on Crown property overseas is even harder than getting approval through the toughest council processes here in Sydney. And I mention that because while this may seem like a superficial thing, the rehabilitation of what turned out to be the only grass lawn tennis court in Washington, D.C., who knew, also turned out to be a great diplomatic coup for Joe's tenure as ambassador, as it became a draw for the great and good to come and play and chat. But, of course, Joe's renos were sadly to be outdone by those of Donald Trump, and readers are given the full fly-on-the-wall treatment as the now former president, after a glorious state dinner, showed off the taps in a new ensuite in the Lincoln bedroom. I love this ensuite. Look at these amazing taps. We've just had this one renovated.
That's right.
Donald says, like the true, as Joe said, real estate man he isn't hard. And it was around this time on this evening that Joe tells us that he'd hit the high water mark of Australia-American relations. Is that even a term? A far cry from the train wreck of a phone call that Trump had with Malcolm Turnbull at the start of 2017. And it also is countless stories like this, and not even all of them about Trump, that make the book. Again, as I say, too many such memoirs, such as these, are centered around the interests of the author, and particularly his or her legacy, and let the reader be damned as they read their take on events into the Hansard of history. Now, of course, it wouldn't all be smooth sailing and ensuites, and Joe is careful to tell us about the tough negotiations with America on the subject of free trade and copping flack from the administration for its resolutely pro-free trade stance, which we may have a chat about later on. And of course, there is also a section on China, or as Trump would say, China. I've always wanted to stand on the lectern and say that. China. And Joe's long fascination with it, from a teenager visiting with his folks on the first commercial tour for Australians to China after the company reopened, and dealing with being heavied by these big sort of time treasury officials from China who were basically, well, it's a long, complicated story, which he can tell you, and I won't waste any more time. The point is that you should do so yourself, because in this book, the reader is treated to the real sense that you were there in the rooms where it happened. I'm not going to bust into Hamilton, don't worry. Even though it is a former treasurer like, Hamilton. Anyway, but there is through it all a deep love of and fascination with America as well. Joe clearly loves that country, as do I, even if reading it at times, I disagreed maybe with some of your takes about what was going on there, but perhaps we can argue the toss, and you've spent more time maybe there recently than I've had the chance to. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to launch Joe Hockey's Diplomatic. And now I turn it back over to Joe.
Thanks, James. That's great. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. I won't use the rostrum if that's all right, but thank you everyone for coming along and in a post-COVID environment. James, you're the first person from the Daily Telegraph I've seen that's worn a tie. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. It must be a rather august occasion for him to do something like that. So thank you for doing that. That's a great sacrifice, I know. And thank you for reading the book because, I worked on the book I was in DC and it was a COVID book really, and I'd get up 5:30 in the morning and work with Leo Shanahan. And Leo was on the other side of the planet, and he was as a journalist, tending to work at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I was working 5:30 in the morning. And he was great to work with, and I want to pay a particular tribute to him. I don't really believe in the concept of ghostwriters, so his name's on the front cover, but he's not getting any of the royalties. So, but it was, it's not a vanity project. It was never intended to be a vanity project at all. I've had those before, and they're not really terribly rewarding. What I wanted to do is provide an insight into the relationship between Australia and the United States, but also importantly to give you the opportunity to understand what really happens in diplomacy, because at the end of the day, diplomacy is simply human interaction. That's what it is. The relationships between countries are so often based on the relationships between the individuals that lead the countries. And in this instance, I had an incredibly privileged position. Barack Obama I knew from the G20, and he was professorial in his attitude. There's a couple of good stories about the first time I went in there to present my credentials and met with him, and he was very engaging, but Australia was a long way down the list in terms of priorities. And then along comes Donald Trump, the whole campaign, Hillary, what that was really about. That was quite interesting. It was a fascinating period. And you're right, DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, was just absolutely befuddled about my engagement with the Trump campaign. Thank God I did. And then there's the insights into how you deal with crises. And we had a few along the way. We created a few along the way as well. So that was quite challenging. I will tell you a couple. There's lots of good anecdotes in the book I think about. But you mentioned the Oval Office with Donald Trump. So first time I went into the Oval Office, Donald Trump says, he says, Joe, he says, I'm not going to, Joe, see that button over there? They said, don't touch the button, Mr. President. And there's a red button on the table, right? We're engaged in this conversation. I can't remember, it was about drought and bushfires and stuff like that. And suddenly he smacks the red button. And of course, I'm just taken aback a bit. And then comes a lady with a Diet Coke. You know, it's like, and Donald thought that was hilarious. And then, so he does have a sense of humour. On the golf cart, first time we played golf, and it's very, very disarming to play golf with the President of the United States, I can tell you, because he has, 22 carts full of Secret Service and snipers everywhere and helicopter, and there's a helicopter that's got this big bucket, and on the first tee, we're standing there. He said, see that bucket? He said, if things go bad, that's for me. And Brett Bayer, who we were playing with, said, what about us? He said, you're going to die. Which is quite intimidating when the President of the United States says that. Anyway, and it's not just about Trump, because Trump was a big figure, but there are others in the book. Bill Clinton, who is a great guy and a genuine cheat on the golf course. He took 7 hours to play 18 holes of golf with him, and he had great stories. I don't actually think I put this in the book, but he said to me, he said, Joe, what are the name of your children? I said, Xavier, Adelaide, and Ignatius. He said, they're great. They're great names. They're Jesuit names. He said, I love my time at Georgetown University. And by this stage, I was exhausted with his stories. And he started going on about the Jesuits. And I said, so what happened? And he said, I was thinking about becoming a Jesuit priest. And I said to him, was it the vow of poverty or the vow of chastity that was the problem? I was like, oh, no, I'm not about money. Not about money. So it's like, anyway, so it was, I give these sort of anecdotes to provide some context to the serious side of it, which is that the United States is an amazing country. It's made up of 50 different countries. And Australians who tend to travel to the capital cities don't appreciate just how diverse the nation truly is. And in fact, Hillary Clinton won the 30 largest cities in America, but lost the election. And there was this upheaval in the nation. And Donald Trump gave voice to people who had been disenfranchised. And that was the strength of his candidacy and the strength of his presidency. And it's probably the strength of his next candidacy as well. which we can get into. Finally, the United States is a force for good. I mean, we're the only nation on earth that has fought side by side with them in every single major conflict for 100 years. And we've done that because we share values. Americans love Australians, genuinely. And it's heartfelt, and it goes way beyond any relationship between a Prime Minister and a President. But most significantly, we share the values that we're prepared to fight for and die for. And we have, in vast numbers. And for so long as we share those values, no matter who the adversary may be, we will overcome that threat. And that's never more poignant than at the moment with, the threat of China, but also the behaviour of Russia in Ukraine. We're at a tipping point in history, but of course we're at a tipping point every 10, 20 years. But this is significant. It's a great battle between the autocracies and the democracies. And frankly, who knows where it goes? That's part of the challenge of the book, and that's part of the challenge of discussion tonight. So over to you guys. Let's go.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you.
I want to start with one of the themes from early in the book, which is your sense that one day you were going to be Prime Minister and potentially the disappointment that arose as a result of that. Back in 2009, we've got opposition leader Malcolm Turnbull. We have obviously the issue around the ETS at that time. You're the front runner for the Liberal leadership. In an alternative world, do you come out of that meeting as Liberal leader? You go to the election as Liberal leader. Are you running for re-election as Prime Minister right now?
I lost by a vote, one vote. And Malcolm said he wouldn't run. He did run. He lied to me. I say that in the book. He doesn't deny it now. Peter Dutton sat in the party room next to me for years and said, so where at the lodge would you put the jumping castle for the kids? Didn't happen. Didn't happen. And that's the way it is. I'm not going to live my life in the rearview mirror, and I'm not going to pretend, it would have been Prime Minister, but it was just an opportunity that I missed out on.
I think that's a really good answer. I want to start, I think, with something that you predicted that a lot of other people didn't predict, which is the rise of Trump. I think the consensus in Australia, the consensus in the political class, the consensus in the Australian media, with perhaps some prominent examples. The consensus was Trump didn't have a chance. He didn't have a chance in the Republican primaries. He didn't have a chance in the election. What made you think Donald Trump could become president of the United States?
So I create every election a fictional character in my own mind. And in Australian politics, we had Betty Bankstown, working class Australian mum, 2 kids, living in Bankstown. And I created Mary Milwaukee and kept asking myself, what does Mary's life look like? This is real. This is Mary has worked 7 years at Walmart, earns $12.50 an hour, hasn't had a pay rise, 7 years. Her husband is one of 2.5 million white truck drivers in America. Her father might have been a coal miner in West Virginia. She'd probably go to church twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays. She has a son and a daughter. Her son's done 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. And her daughter, she hopes one day would get to college, but she thinks she'll never have the money to be able to pay for that opportunity. She has pretty traditional values, and for years people have made her feel guilty about her life, about going to church, about being married, in a heterosexual marriage, about not liking swearing on TV, about working hard and not going to university. And she's had enough. And she feels as though no one has ever spoken for her, let alone engaged in a conversation with her. And I could sense, as soon as I got to the United States, this arrogance in the cities. And when I travelled outside the cities, I could sense that people felt they weren't being listened to. And so I sent my embassy team. There's 400 in the embassy, and Australia has a huge presence in the United States, as Michael knows. We've got military personnel in 32 US states. And I just told people to get out, go out, travel, meet people, talk, listen, most importantly. And they did. And suddenly there was this sea change in the embassy. Who came back and said, my God, Trump's a real threat. I said, yeah, because he's giving voice to the people that haven't been heard and haven't had a voice. So that's why I thought he could win. Comey's reopening of the FBI investigation a week out from polling day, anyone that understands politics knows if you're spending the last week of a campaign defending your integrity, you're gone. And Hillary was finished. And I said it publicly at Sydney University 2 weeks from polling day that I thought Trump could win. And but I told Malcolm Turnbull and others that I thought he would win. And he did.
James?
I mean, I had a very similar experience, but mine was viewing it through the prism of watching it from Australia. I remember one of the big things that struck me during that whole time was that I would be driving into work. I forget what I was doing at that point, but driving to work and hearing, the ABC and stuff covering Trump, and they were treating this guy as this complete, absolute dope, a moron, out of touch, and all this stuff. And then I would go and I would listen to these press conferences that he was doing every day, and they were 45 minutes, an hour, and sometimes 90 minutes, and he was tackling and talking to these reporters about just every issue under the sun, and his mind was ranging all over the place, and it was nothing like how he was being portrayed in the press here. And then I was watching the press in the States, and then I saw there was a figure that made me, this is the moment that I thought he was going to win. I thought all of Hillary's fundraising has been done in Martha's Vineyard, Manhattan, Hollywood, Los Angeles. She has done nothing between the coasts. And every single day, I think it was a miles traveled and number of venues hit. And in those last weeks of the campaign, Trump was just hitting 2-3 times, getting in front of 2, 3, 4 times as many people. And as you know, it's a numbers game.
Sure.
And so that's when I really, was quite convinced he was going to win. I'd like to ask you, though, Joe, about, this image that the press portrayed of Trump as this just, clownish, buffoonish figure versus what did you find of, Trump's admittedly, off-kilter, somewhat different to what you'd find in politics, mind, how he worked, how his intellect worked when you were interacting with him?
His most valuable asset is he's authentic. And, there were moments where during the campaign, I just, you can't say that. You can't do that. What the hell are you thinking? Right? I was appalled at some of the things he did. But you know what? People gave him a leave pass because they just went, oh, that's Donald Trump. He's being authentic. And we're sick of fake politicians. We're sick of Mr. Perfect, and they're all men at the time. But we want real people. We want a real voice. And they're unbelievably forgiving. Authenticity is the most valuable commodity of 21st century, whether it be in business or politics or anything. If you're authentic, you have enormous forgiveness from the community for what you do.
But it was pretty chaotic, right? In the book, you talk about the anecdote where at one stage Trump came out in favour of a $15 national minimum wage.
Yeah. That's quite a... Well, so I went and saw Chris Christie, who was his campaign chairman. Chris is a great guy, a terrible public image for various reasons, but a terrific guy, and we got on fabulously, New Jersey governor. And he said, how are we going to win the working class? And I said, well, Australia has the highest minimum wage in the world, and it's virtuous because people spend money. And the biggest spenders are the people on the lowest wages. And they spend money and then they lift GDP because 2/3 of economic growth comes from household consumption. And I said, if you can increase the minimum wage, then I think you'll see a massive gain amongst blue-collar workers. Because, you know, in DC, the minimum wage is $5 an hour for someone working in hospitality, plus tips. So he said, what do you think? I said, I think 15's a good start. He said, yeah, and we debated it. Anyway, he said, look, I'll go and speak to Donald about it. And then I had my head of congressional with me, and then it's like 6 days later, he came running into my office. He said, oh, my God, Donald Trump has just rung up Fox News and said he thinks $15 minimum wage is a great idea. I went, that's fantastic. You know, that's great. He said, you've got to stop giving him ideas like that. I said, no, I believe in it. And anyway, the net result was that the number of Republicans went nuts at Trump, and he basically walked back from it. But, yeah, it's happening now, as it should.
But it was a big, I think, factor, a big component of some of the chaos that we saw with Trump is the extent to which he altered the economic direction, or at least appeared to alter the economic direction of the Republican Party, which has always been seen as that party of, you know, free markets and free trade and low taxes. Now, Trump obviously cut taxes, but he also got big into tariffs at one point, right?
Well, he cut taxes, and but he was the biggest spending president in peacetime. I mean, he was a terrible spender. And, you know, the United States, he didn't reduce the size of government at all. So he was not a traditional conservative. I mean, he was more Democrat in that sense. He spent a lot of money, and he embedded it. He wouldn't have any cuts to health or education. He tried with Obamacare. That sounds
familiar, though, doesn't it? That phrase?
Yeah. I had to deal with it once. But, you know, the US is having... So the US on average has a recession every 10 years. And we're in the 12th year of economic growth, and the US is spending more, US government as a percentage of GDP, than any other time, with the net result that it was highly inflationary. It would, because interest rates were so low. So, yeah, I don't think and what he was doing is providing massive stimulus into the market, and then he had tax cuts, which are another stimulus, another cost to the budget. And, you know, frankly, it was a false dawn. Tariffs. So he thought tariffs were a great idea because they were a tax on imports. So they dissuaded people from buying the imports, and they raised taxes. What he failed to understand is that they're inflationary because they increase prices. But also they're a tax on consumers. That's what a tariff is. And what he was caught up in is the world of the 80s and 90s where there was no integrated supply chains. So lumber from Canada, as they call it, lumber from Canada is the main source of lumber in the United States. There's hardly any domestic lumber supply of any significance. So you impose a tariff on it, all the housing costs go up. Pretty simple, because you've got mainly supply from Canada. Another great example, and it's not particularly relevant in tariffs, but the United States has this law called the National Industrial Technology Base, which it mandates that the US military has to buy US manufactured goods. So all the uniforms worn by the military are in fact made in the USA. It was only after COVID that they realised that all the antibiotics that went into the soldiers when they were injured came from India and China, right? Every bit of the antibiotics. So, you know, there is this massive redesign of the US economy at the moment, focusing on, you know, renationalising the supply chain in one sense, but also putting up barriers to foreign imports. And that's not sustainable. And thank God Australia does not do that.
But isn't part of the reason for Trump's appeal, though? I mean, he took something like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and took, you know, your Mary Milwaukee character and said part of the reason why you're economically, you know, talking about the coal miner family or whatever, you are economically disenfranchised because those jobs have moved to Mexico. So politically, that was quite a popular thing.
It was, but it was also somewhat dishonest because NAFTA made America richer too. So free trade has made America rich. There's no doubt about that because capitalism, you know, America is the centre of global capital markets. And because the US dollar is the reserve currency, you need the United States for global trade, and you need the United States to either export capital from the United States or the American consumer to be a key part of your end supply chain. I think, what he did was he weaponized the feelings of the middle America, and to quote the CBS reporter talking about Churchill in World War II, about Churchill weaponizing the English language and taking it into battle. What Trump did was he weaponized the mood of the middle class in America and took it into a battle with China, in particular on tariffs and protection and so on. China, just to be, and I do spend a little bit of time in the book on China, China lost 19 million manufacturing jobs between 1996 and 2005. 19 million. Far more than America, right? America lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, partly because they had cheaper imports from, other countries. But also we've seen a massive disruption of manufacturing. And as a result, there is a huge cohort of disenfranchised blue-collar workers, not just in the United States, but all around the world. We saw it in Australia, Newcastle, Wollongong, various other places. The car manufacturing, lest I refer back to, closing factories.
You had my vote for shutting the car industry.
Yeah, well, it was
an
painful,
absolute sinecure.
It was painful, but and I know a lot of people hurt when I had to make that decision, but the world's changed dramatically. Trump was able to ride that wave, and tariffs were the opportunity for him to prosecute that argument.
And where to now, before we leave free trade, because obviously that's one of my particular interests, where to now for some of these global free trade movements? I mean, you note in the US it's not just Trump and a significant portion of the Republicans that are now opposed to free trade. We've got Sanders, even Clinton was against the TPP by the time we got to 2016.
Yeah, Hillary was, yeah. We nearly pulled it off, though. That's a good story, isn't it? So, America was the United States was the architect of the Bretton Woods framework, which post-World War II created the IMF and the World Bank, and also, obviously, the WTO. Trump's treatment of global trade was appalling, and he was completely off-piste on it. And where to now? Well, obviously Biden hasn't wound them back because they're relatively popular in the United States. But I think we're coming into a global inflationary environment, and unless we improve productivity, unless we lower costs, we're all going to pay a very big price. And I think sooner or later you're going to start to see the reopening of the the calcified veins of free trade. And Australia is in exactly the right place. We need to be the advocate for it, the fearless advocate for it. Because we produce 4 times what we consume as a nation. And we produce 4 times what we consume. So we want to sell to the world. We don't want people taxing the stuff we sell because we lose, and they lose at the end of it as well.
Before throwing open to questions, there's 2 quick things I wanted to cover first. One is let's call it the downturn in relations between Australia and Donald Trump, particularly Alexander Downer's unwitting triggering of the Mueller review.
Oh my God! Yeah.
We did have Ambassador Downer here actually.
Oh, I bet he didn't talk about it.
After he came home,
he
was. There's a fantastic video of that event for those who are interested.
So Alexander Downer was the High Commissioner in London, and a fellow by the name of Papadopoulos, who was a real spiv, was on the Trump campaign, and one of Alexander's staff was in a relationship with an Israeli diplomat, which is curious in itself.
Diplomat?
And the diplomat suggested to Alexander Downer's staff that Alexander should meet this person, Papadopoulos, who was on Donald Trump's campaign. And Papadopoulos said over one drink, apparently, at a pub in London, he said, look, we've got a whole lot of dirt on Hillary and it's going to be dumped. And people are helping us, basically. And Downer thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Look, I'll send a cable back to Canberra, diplomatic cable, and tell them about it. And, of course, Canberra just, went into stunned shock and didn't react Because the worst thing you can do in the public service is react. You've just got to pretend it didn't come. You didn't see it. It's not there, right? So, and that was that. And then WikiLeaks happened, and they dumped a whole lot of stuff on Hillary. And Downer, rightly, walked around to the US Embassy, and there was no ambassador at the time, went to the Sharjah and said, hey, listen, this fella Papadopoulos came and told me that there was a whole lot of dirt on Hillary Clinton, and you ought to be aware of it. This guy, alluded to potentially coming from Russia. And, of course, what happened at that time was the FBI, they'd already launched an investigation into Hillary over her private emails. So they needed to balance it up. And they immediately launched an investigation into Donald Trump's campaign off the back of Downer's evidence, right? Which was, I've seen FBI investigations, I've talked to lots of people at the FBI. It was a big step. It also happened to be the case that the future head of the CIA was in the room, and she was the head of the CIA office in London. So that just added to the conspiracy for Trump. And out of all of that came, the Mueller inquiry, which was dominated American political gossip reporting for, what seemed like years. Anyway, Donald Trump he called him Alexander Downing, which I've made a lot of fun of. And I said to Alexander, if you can't remember your name, you're not famous, mate. Anyway, so Trump just, he went and he said Australia started the whole Mueller stuff. And he, in one stage when we were playing golf down in Mar-a-Lago, he really tried to humiliate me in front of 60 or 70 people. It was really bad. But he just, he had these rants. He'd let him rant. You'd be very careful not to interrupt him during a rant. I learned that. And then, he'd move on. And so, we were at the epicentre of that, and it took some, even if I do say so, some deft diplomacy at a point, and I know Lindsay Graham's in town. He and I had a great battle in Twitter. It was... he put out a letter saying Australia should be better than this, and I responded without consulting Canberra with a letter back to Lindsay and saying, actually, Australia is a lot better than you think, and your behaviour is outrageous, and it got, I think, 19 million views. You got to know when to push and when to just cop it.
It probably helped, James, that Mueller didn't turn out to be the smoking gun the Democrats wanted.
No.
Well, but I mean, if you could go into all of where that all did come from, half of that stuff on Trump was paid for by the Hillary campaign. So
is that right?
Yes.
I don't know that.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Steele
The Steele dossier.
Really?
Yes.
No.
The law firm.
I don't buy into that.
On that note of...
I never believed it because Trump is a germaphobe. He's
that stuff, exactly, right, yeah. We don't need to talk about that.
No. Although perhaps that's not the right note to throw over to audience questions, but maybe it is.
Yeah.
We've got one here. We've got a roving microphone, so if you put your hand up, we'll get a mic to you and you can ask our superstars here.
Hi, Joe. I knew you'd be a good bloke because we both went to St. Aloysius.
Oh.
But I went there before you, so I set the example.
Only just.
I set the example for
good
you.
on you.
Anyway, look...
I tell everyone it was a selective school when I went there. No one believes it.
Look, the question I want to ask, and I'm not sure there's one question or two, but what do you think while you're in Washington was your greatest achievement? What was the most difficult thing you had to tackle?
Oh, wow. No, the greatest achievement was... I deepened the relationship between our intelligence agencies and the US intelligence agencies. So to be, and it was already on a trajectory and together with the military relationship, but of the 13 attempted terrorist attacks in Australia, 10 or 11 were thwarted with US intelligence. Yeah. And look, the relationship is so deep. I mean, it's really, they're vast. The intel agencies in the US are vast. I mean, I don't know how many the CIA has, maybe. But, they've got 16 different intelligence agencies. And one of them is, it's stunning. Like there's this agency called the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, right? Not many people know about it. It's a huge compound outside Washington, D.C. It's probably got 30,000 employees, right? And what they do, and it's little known, but what they do is they capture satellite images of every centimetre of the Earth's surface. And so when they identified Barack Obama identified that Osama bin Laden, the intelligence group, human intelligence, found that he was in a town called Abbottabad. And they knew the compound he was in. But before they could send the SEAL team in, they needed to know what the layout of the house was, right? And they went, how are we going to find this? And, of course, this is the American intelligence system. Lay down the challenge through the DNI, Director of National Intelligence. How are we going to find out about the layout of the house? And someone comes back and says, we took satellite images of that part of Pakistan in 1969, way back, and they looked at when the house was being built. They gathered all the photos and imagery, and then they rebuilt the house, and then the SEAL team trained on it. And that, God bless America, right? And they have helped us in numerous occasions, and that is the best achievement. Just helping to deepen that. The most difficult, the most difficult. Oh, there's plenty of those like. I don't know. Holding my nerve when you got the President of the United States screaming at you. Yeah, that's and not getting angry. I mean, because you're a patriot, right? That was challenging because normally my instinct was always to fight back. I won't be bullied by anyone, right? And Malcolm Turnbull and I sort of both knew Kerry Packer, and Kerry was a lot of good features, but he was a bully, right? And Malcolm knew he was bullying, and so we sort of worked out that Donald Trump had very similar characteristics to Kerry Packer. So how do you? We talk. I'd speak to Malcolm once a day.
Really?
Yeah. When he was at Prime Minister, I was ambassador. We talk a lot about everything, and he was, we sort of worked really hard to understand Trump's temperament. The hardest thing maybe was giving up having lunch with Barry Gibb to go and fly to Japan to try and make sure that Scott Morrison and Donald Trump didn't have a fight. I was really upset about missing out on Barry Gibb. I was like,
One here and then over there.
Yeah, John Connor. In terms of analysing Trump's support, one thing that seems to be rarely mentioned in a lot of accounts is the very strong support. I think I can't remember whether it was 20 or 40% of their vote was from fundamentalist white Christians. And that's a really different perspective from the J.D. Vance cowboy elegy, etc., and the discontented working class. And they're the most rusted-on supporters of Trump and remain so.
Well, they do. And that's why there is such an enormous focus in the United States on Supreme Court nominees and the anti-abortion debate. Trump, who only ever went to church twice as President of the United States, I mean, he would be the first to say he's not a God-fearing person. In fact, God should fear him, really. But he knew where a support base was, and he managed it quite well. But having said that, the vote that I found most interesting in the last election was an increase in the black vote, dramatic increase in the black vote in Detroit. And I was sitting, again, it's in the story. George Osborne, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he came to Washington during the previous campaign with Hillary, and we were sitting. I was blessed to have two teetotaler ambassadors on either side of me. Arthur Sinodinos doesn't drink. Kim Beazley didn't drink, but every ambassador has a duty to fill the cellar downstairs, and they filled it with really good wine, right? So Kim did. So when George came, we sat there, just two of us, and watched the debate between Hillary and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump had this line, and both of us, probably combined 35, 40 years in politics. Both of us just stopped. And we looked at each other, and I think George said, "Oh, shit." And it was when Trump said to the American audience, "What do you got to lose? You got high unemployment, you haven't had a wage increase for years. What do you got to lose?" And he went out and said the same to an African-American audience the next day. He said, you've got terrible drug problems, you've got very high unemployment, you've got terrible homelessness, what do you got to lose voting, having a go with me? And it was a cut-through line. It just amazing cut-through. And when he said it at that debate, we both went, that's the killer line. Because people in America are going, I'm sick of all the traditional pollies. And Trump says, give me a go. I was a billionaire businessman. Everything I've touched is a success. Give me a go. And they went, yep, I'll give him a go.
I'd love your thoughts on that.
Look, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that situation that Trump was going into, it's not just, though, about, I think, the economics. It goes back to that cultural thing.
Yeah.
They were getting sneered at. They were getting shat on, pardon my French, but they were getting, they were just told, you're worthless, your beliefs are wrong, everything is wrong. We're going to pump values that you don't like into your home and school through television, through culture, through Hollywood. And Trump says this whole thing isn't working. And I think that the rise of the black vote and the Hispanic vote for Trump is absolutely huge. There was a great video. I remember watching videos from around the country in 2016 when people were voting. And there was this little clip from a local news reporter. And she's standing there in a gymnasium and people are behind her doing the voting and everything like that. And there's this young black guy and he's wearing a hoodie. And he goes and he casts his ballot and he comes back and he just pokes his head behind this white reporter and just peels his hoodie back and points to his hat. It's a Make America Great Again hat. He smiles and runs off because he knows he's done something really subversive and he wants to show the people who are watching, don't take me for granted, because I think that's the other thing. People thought we're taken for granted. We're seeing this here now, and I think the greatest shift that I've seen in my life, I've been watching politics literally since I was a kid, is that, the party of capital has moved from the right to the left. And the party of, as you say, opportunity and of building wealth and so on and getting up is on the right. But that party on the left, I think what people are doing now, they associate that with also holding other people down, taking up the ladder.
Sure.
It's not opportunity. It's about we've got ours. Now, suck it, And
it's interesting watching Elon Musk's
fascinating
evolution compared to Jeff Bezos and a few of the others.
And I mean,
Larry Page and Sergey Brin and so on. Just to watch the different trends. And, it might be Musk's, South African roots, but it's really interesting. Moves his factories from California to Texas, to Austin, Texas.
And now refused to seat on the board of Twitter so that he can keep buying shares and
that's right.
possibly take it over. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
One here and then down the front.
So, Ian Lonesdown, Joe.
Hi.
I thought we would get a little bit of input from you following on this last interchange, really, is what's the future in the sense of we all hear here in Australia about the country being incredibly divided and that there's no progress here, it's divided and we're all at each other's throats in America. Is that your sense of America today? And how is this going to resolve? How do you see it resolving in the next 5-10 years?
So this is a theory according to Joe. You look at the three most influential countries in the world today, which are the United States, China and Russia. Sorry about the UK, but, it's the way it is. Each of those countries was born out of a vicious revolution, relatively modern times. And each of those countries followed that revolution with a horrendous civil war, to the point where the people don't trust their fellow citizens, and to the point where they don't trust what I call head office, the capital, Washington, Beijing, or Moscow. Two of the three countries rule by force of law out of Moscow and Beijing. And the threat is not external, the threat is their own people. The greatest concern of the Communist Party of China is an uprising amongst its own people. I won't go into detail on that. Same with Russia, with Putin. That's what he fears. In the United States, the fabric of the nation, the Constitution, devolves power from the Commander-in-Chief. It's equal sharing of power between the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the Commander-in-Chief. And they've got the institutions that at the end of the day, even after January the 6th, have shown they are robust enough to cope with a tremendous amount of pressure. Now, that's why the United States will continue for so long, and that's how the United States copes with a massive amount of internal dissension. I mean, bear in mind, the US Civil War, at the time the US had a population the same size as Australia, and 500,000 people died in the US Civil War. Genuinely family killing family. And the US lost more of its own citizens in the US Civil War than it lost in every other war combined. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, etc. And the reason why Americans carry guns, and James might not like this, but it's true, is because they don't trust their fellow citizens. And I experienced that, as I write about in the book, in one instance where we had to arm up in the house to protect the family. So having said all of that, when the United States has a common opponent, a common enemy, a threat to both its values and its security, it unites. It was quite interesting on Ukraine. I was there as it unfolded, and all of a sudden there was no partisan behaviour. Everyone came together, Democrats and Republicans. The only outsider was Tucker Carlson, right, who was off-piste, and Trump made some silly comments, and Pompeo, who should be better than that. But everyone came together and said, right, we need to stand behind the Ukrainian people. Really impressive. And it was, it was a moment of great unity in the United States.
James, then January 6th is not the Republican ending moment the Democrats fear?
Oh, God, not hardly. No, I mean, the January 6th, I think, yes, there was a lot of bad behavior that day, but I think there's also a lot of, we've got hundreds of people who are just sitting around in jail cells now in Washington who have been charged with anything off of that. It was a bad incident, but it was not, I think, the threat to the Republic. I think a lot needs to be looked at about how exactly this was allowed to happen. I think the Capitol Police need to have, a lot needs to be asked for what happened there. And I think also the subsequent garrisoning of the Capitol as a result, I think sends a terribly destructive message. I was against after 9/11 when they blocked off Pennsylvania Avenue. And in my whole lifetime, in going back and forth to America, every time you go, that security state is ratcheted up for the. You would see that all the time. I always think of this because we were watching PM go to Yarralumla the other day, and he was in traffic. I used to travel with President Clinton when he was president in the White House press corps. You'd be in this 50, 60, 80 car motorcade. And so it always struck me, in Australia, it's a much different scenario.
It's quite interesting. I mean, this is an insider sort of thing. But, we were sitting around having a drink in the White House, and I won't say who was there, but their view was that Donald Trump would probably be the last president to live in the White House.
Really?
Yeah. They thought it is rapidly getting to the point where you can't secure the White House for the president.
You see, I think that's, and we saw that a long time before January 6th. We saw that with, you had, they tried to burn down the St. John's Episcopal. That was there. That was horrible.
Yeah, I know. But having, the big telling factor, and Michael will know this as a former senator, in Australia, thank God, no one sleeps in their office in Parliament House, unless they're drunk.
Well,
but they don't. But they seriously don't, right?
With their age.
Oh, sorry. That might have been in your day. But,
only as a euphemism,
but no, people don't live in their apartments.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first went to Washington, Paul Ryan took me into the speaker suite. He said, "Oh, yeah, I sleep on the couch over there." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, I'm trying to save for school fees, for university fees for my kids." And he said, 60% of the members of Congress would actually live in their offices. So the reason why January 6th really, really got a reaction from everyone, genuine reaction, was it was a home invasion for a lot of them. It wasn't just an office invasion. 1996, we had the CFMEU try and pull down Parliament House.
Yeah.
Right. I remember that quite vividly, right? And it was like an office. It was still an office. But for a lot of congressmen and women, that's their home for, whatever, 30 weeks a year. And it was terrifying for them, yeah. And I totally, it was a terrible, terrible moment. But having, again, you provide context, and I provide some context in the book, about other events.
Please.
Joe, you were a political appointee to Washington, just as I was a political appointee to New York, and the great bulk of Washington ambassadors have been political appointees, and they've been outstanding as you were. The media,
most of them were appointed so the Prime Minister could get them out of the country. When you go back over the history of them, you just think,
yes, they've all been second prize, haven't
that's
they?
right, they've all been second prize. That's true. That's true.
Joe, the media always says, what a disgrace that a bloody politician has been sent to such an important place. Now, I found in New York that if I had serious problems, all I had to do, because of my close relationship with the Prime Minister, was to ring him up and say, "John, Morgan Stanley is beside themselves about the bloody tax office."
Yeah.
Now, I wondered how your relationship, which may have been difficult at times with your Prime Minister, meant that you often used that close political relationship rather than the distant relationship that is involved if you have to go through the departmental channels.
Yeah. So I ignored the Chinese ambassador in Washington because he was 30 rungs below Premier Li, who I'd met numerous occasions, and Xi Jinping, who I'd met on a couple of occasions, and Lo Ji-wei, the finance minister, and there was so many layers down, I just didn't bother dealing with him, right? When Taro Aso, who was Deputy Prime Minister of Japan, came to town, he came around and saw me at my residence, and the Japanese ambassador was horrified that he'd go and see another ambassador, but he was my friend, former Prime Minister of Japan. And why am I saying that? Because we've got to put our best foot forward in Washington. It is our most important relationship. You need to, as the Americans say, full court press. So Kim Beazley was a former, deputy prime minister. He had some gravitas, but even then, Kim admits it. He had no real relationship with the White House under President Obama, when you go to a place, you've got to have the chutzpah to say, I want to see the secretary, or I'm not going to see anyone. And because I chaired the G20 before that, knew President Obama and Jack Lew and Janet Yellen and various other people, I had the chutzpah to be able to say, I want to see these people. I don't want to see the deputy or the assistant secretary or so on. And that, as soon as I saw the secretary, my deputy would then be able to see the deputy secretary or the assistant secretary. But it automatically ratcheted everyone up the totem pole. So when I played golf with Donald Trump and I then leaked it to the media, right, it was all of a sudden all the doors opened. It wasn't about Joe's ego. Well, there's a little bit, but it really wasn't about Joe's ego. It was about sending a message that I'm a player in DC, and if you want to get, if I bring you, you want to see me, right? It was that familiarity that wouldn't come from a one-off meeting. And it was very important. And we were able to weaponise that as well, yeah.
And Andrew used the tennis court.
Andrew Peacock, oh my God, he was, as you know, I mean, Andrew Peacock, when he was ambassador, obviously he was very close to George Bush, and that we have a room in the residence which we call the Shirley MacLaine room, which when my mother came to visit, I said, "You're staying in the room that Shirley MacLaine stayed in," But Andrew Peacock, God bless him, I mean, he had Shirley MacLaine in one room, he had his Miss Texas in another room. Lucky there's 13 bedrooms at the residence. Right? It was, and he had quite the parties, and everyone knew he was close to President Bush, and all of a sudden, all the doors opened for Andrew. And look. And you've got to have some bravado with the public service back here. I mean, the Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs said to me that she was my boss. That wasn't going to work for me. I just not interested. So yeah.
Did you kept the department informed though when you rang?
Others kept the department informed.
Someone kept the department.
Someone did. I would not. I mean, because...
Well, the press kept the department informed you were playing golf.
And the thing is, so the British, I didn't write any cables, which was I just said I'm not writing any cables because I didn't trust people back here not to leak them. The British ambassador, Sir Kim Durrick, he wrote cables. And 3 people back in London got those cables. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and one other, and they were leaked to the media. And that was the end of his career. Mm. That was he was recalled. Trump said, I'm never going to deal with that ambassador. And that was it. Mm. And I mean, I formed the view that you just don't put in writing what really matters. I mean, you got all the secure facilities and everything else. And I'd have secure, ultra secure phone calls with people.
But did you ring Malcolm directly?
Oh, I'd ring Malcolm every day. He and I would talk every day. Every day. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to press you on a remark you made earlier in the context of the clash of ideologies, democracy versus autocracies, and the great fear that the, let's call it the free world has about America edging towards autocracy under Trump. The remark that you made was that the American Constitution proved remarkably robust after the events of the 6th of January. But, I mean, I think that was probably because of the commitment to key individuals to upholding the Constitution, obviously rather than the document itself. I wondered what you thought, knowing the players involved and knowing the American electorate as you do, whether fears about if the right people were in place under a second Trump administration, given that Trump was instrumental in inciting the events of the 6th of January, if the possibility of revolution, or at least a good attempt at it, is something that you think is actually a realistic fear?
I don't. So the United States has over 19,000 law enforcement agencies. Just think about that, 19,000 law enforcement agencies. I mean, in a lot of little towns, they've got, Papa is the sheriff and Bubba is the deputy sheriff and so on. But there are, a vast number, and they're not under one controller. They are their own, own fiefdoms in some cases. The US military obviously has a number of different arms, but the one that intrigues me is the National Guard, which is at the beck and call of individual governors. And, you know, various jets that we've tried to get over the years, you know, there are the governor of Hawaii has one of the most lethal squadrons of jets under his control in the world. And people flying for Hawaiian Air during the week go on training in these jets on the weekend. And so there are these organised defence forces under the command of individual governors, as well as you've got the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army. And then on top of all of that, America seems to have a few militias, which are kind of weird, right? These are you know, some odd people that have their own military capacity. Whilst it has the capacity to have some level of kinetic domestic activity, ultimately the nation still believes in itself. And there is so much firepower within the nation but it also has diverse leadership that I don't think a civil war can eventuate, unless there is something that can divide it, and usually it's economic. So let's be frank, the US Civil War started on economic grounds. It wasn't race. It started as a war on the basis of economic rights. If America became, the glue that holds the US together is hope. So, you know, I met this unbelievable woman who was raising her daughter, and her daughter was 8, and she was working at a diner in Los Angeles, and I struck up a conversation with her, and of course she wanted to be an actress, and she had terrible skin, and you know, I really felt for her because she was working 2 shifts, and she said, all I want is for my daughter to have a better life than me. And if I can break into Hollywood, you know, so be it. But, you know, I know that one day she can be an actress, right? And reflecting on it was all about the hope. I might not get there, but, you know, my daughter could be president of the United States, or my daughter could be the richest person in the United States. That hope holds the US together. And because everyone needs to be able to believe they could be the richest person in the United States, they could be the best sports person in the United States, or they could be president of the United States no matter what. As soon as that hope is taken away, it will crumble. And you know, it's interesting because the China that I know, you've seen the emergence of this hope that people think they can have a better quality of life. And with the one-child policy, it's much more significant. And the Beijing knows this. I mean, you know, Lo Ji-wei, the former finance minister, said to me, he said, the moment we take away ambition from our people is the moment we lose our nation. So I just want to emphasise, I don't think the United States will do that until the point where people give up on the future. And I think the US is a very long way from that.
It's a fantastic sentiment. James, can we wrap up with some hope?
Look, I don't think I can say it any better than that. That's a great note to end on.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
For decades, CIS has been a fiercely independent voice working hard to promote sound liberal principles. To be notified of our future videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel, then click the notification bell. We rely solely on the generosity of people like you for donations to advance our classical liberal cause. Check out the links on screen now to see how you can get involved.